Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today, we're going on a deep dive into a really fascinating aspect of Islamic jurisprudence,
Oh, great.
preemption in property, specifically how it's detailed in the Muwatta Imam Malik, Book 35,
Okay, sounds good.
preemption in property. You might be thinking, what exactly is preemption?
Yeah, I can imagine some listeners might be wondering that.
Well, think of it this way. You and a group of friends, you get together, you buy a piece of property, you're sharing ownership.
Okay.
Now, one of your friends, they decide to sell their share.
Okay.
This concept of preemption, also called shuf'a in Arabic, it comes into play here. It gives the other partners the right of first refusal, so they can buy that share before anyone else, keeping the ownership within the group. It's like having a priority pass,
Yeah.
You get to go first.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great analogy. It really clarifies how this right works in practice. And it's important to highlight that this isn't just some random rule.
Oh, really?
This is deeply rooted in the Sunnah, the practices of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Okay.
And this really gives it a significance beyond just legal technicalities.
So it's not just the letter of the law, but also about following a practice established by the Prophet himself.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's really interesting. So what does Imam Malik, a renowned scholar of Islamic law, what does he have to say about all this?
Well, Imam Malik considered the Sunnah on preemption to be, undisputed.
Uh-huh.
And in his Muwatta, he states that preemption applies specifically to houses and land that's held in shared ownership.
Okay.
And he emphasizes that this right is a way to preserve the relationships and structure of ownership among the partners.
So it's like saying, as long as we're all in this together, sharing the property, we have each other's backs. But once things are divided up, it's everyone for themselves.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It really captures the essence of that shared responsibility.
Yeah.
But just to clarify, this right only exists as long as that property remains under shared ownership. So, if the land or the house is divided, each partner has their own clearly defined portion, then the right of preemption no longer applies.
It makes sense. Once individual ownership's established, there's less need for preemption.
Yeah.
But let's get into a specific situation here.
Yeah.
Let's say one partner decides to sell their share and another partner wants to exercise their right of preemption.
Right.
What if the first buyer, what if they paid using something other than money?
Okay.
Historically speaking, what if they traded goods or even, considering the context, slaves, and then these items, they lose value or perish before the preemptor can step in?
Oh, that's a really interesting scenario. And it shows the depth and the detail that Islamic jurisprudence addresses.
Wow.
So Imam Malik, he provides specific guidance for this exact situation.
Really?
He says if there's a dispute over the value of the original payment, the first buyer, they have to take an oath confirming the value they claim.
So they're putting their word on the line, backed by the weight of a religious oath. It adds a layer of seriousness to the whole thing.
Exactly. Taking an oath holds a lot of weight in Islamic law. It emphasizes honesty, truthfulness, especially in financial matters.
Right.
And once that oath is taken, the preemptor has two choices. They can either pay the amount that the buyer swore to, or they can choose not to exercise their right of preemption if they think the value is not right.
It's really interesting how the system balances protecting the rights of both sides.
Yeah.
And it emphasizes ethical conduct, too.
Yeah, and that balance is a theme that comes up again and again in Islamic jurisprudence. It's about finding that fairness without being too burdensome or creating opportunities for someone to be taken advantage of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about situations where that initial purchase was made on credit? How does preemption work in those cases?
Well, Imam Malik addresses that as well. He states that if the preemptor, if they can meet the same credit terms that were offered to the first buyer, then they can exercise their right. So they have to be able to step into that same financial arrangement, not just match the price.
Makes sense. But what if the preemptor can't meet those exact credit terms? Do they just lose their right?
Not necessarily. Imam Malik knew that financial situations, they can be different, so he offers an alternative solution.
Okay.
The preemptor can bring in a guarantor, someone who's financially reliable, equal standing with the original buyer, to secure the purchase.
So like a backup plan. You can still exercise your right if you can get a reliable person to vouch for you. It's good to know there's that flexibility.
Exactly. Islamic law tries to uphold the principles while still being adaptable to the complexities of real-world situations.
Right. Life can throw us curveballs.
Right.
People might be traveling for a long time or dealing with unexpected situations.
Yeah.
So what happens if a partner is away for a while? Does their preemption right just disappear because they're not physically present?
That's another excellent question. It highlights the foresight and the consideration built into Islamic law.
Uh-huh.
Imam Malik actually says that absence does not nullify the right of preemption.
Really?
Even if a partner is gone for a very long time, their right remains in place when they come back.
Okay.
It's like their ownership and their rights are on pause, not erased.
That's good to know. The system accounts for life's uncertainties.
Exactly. And we'll continue exploring these nuances and scenarios in the next part of our deep dive. It certainly does. And this idea of protecting rights, it goes even further, into inheritance situations.
Oh.
So if a partner, if they pass away, their right of preemption, it doesn't just vanish.
Uh-huh.
It's inherited by their heirs.
So it lives on. It ensures that the family still has a say over what happens to the shared property.
That's really interesting.
What happens if there are multiple heirs, though? Does everyone have an equal claim?
That's where things get even more interesting. In those cases, with multiple heirs, the right is actually prioritized based on how close their relationship was to the deceased partner.
So a closer relative would have a stronger claim than a distant one?
Exactly. It keeps things within the family structure, respects those bonds.
It's like the system tries to minimize conflict among the heirs while still acknowledging those different family connections.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating. But what happens if you have multiple partners, all alive, and they all want to exercise their right of preemption at the same time? Like imagine a share goes up for sale and suddenly everyone wants in.
That's another great question, and it really shows the level of detail Islamic jurisprudence goes into. It's not always a simple case of one partner stepping in. So Imam Malik, he provides a solution for this kind of preemption rush, you might call it.
Okay.
He clarifies that in these situations, the right of preemption is actually shared among all the interested partners,
Okay.
but it's proportional to the shares they already own in the property.
Oh, so it's like if you own a bigger chunk of the property, you have a bigger claim on the preemption right.
Precisely. It's so elegant, really. It makes sure everything's fair and balanced. No one's getting an unfair advantage. It's like saying, we all shared in the ownership, so we'll share in the preemption right the same way.
Right. It keeps that existing ownership structure in place even when someone decides to sell. That's really thoughtful. Now, this all makes me think about those situations where, let's say the initial buyer, after they buy a share, they decide to, really invest in the property. Maybe plant trees or dig a well or even build something new that increases the value.
That makes sense.
Like
Those
me.
improvements would definitely make the property worth more than the initial price. So the question is, what happens when a preemptor comes along? Do they get to benefit from all that work without, acknowledging the investment that was made?
That's what I was wondering. Doesn't seem fair if they just get all the perks without recognizing the effort and the money that went into it.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And that's where, the principle of fairness really shines through Imam Malik. Talking about this exact scenario, he says that if a preemptor wants to exercise their right in this case, they have to compensate the initial buyer for those improvements.
So it's not just about swooping in and taking advantage of what someone else has done. They have to pay for that added value.
Exactly. It would be totally unjust for the preemptor to, profit from someone else's hard work. This rule protects the investment made by the initial buyer while still allowing for the preemption, right? It's a balance, but Islamic jurisprudence, it handles it really well.
It's really impressive how the system anticipates these potential issues and provides these clear guidelines to resolve them. It's like it's designed to create a sense of trust and mutual benefit, even in these financial transactions.
You've got it. It really emphasizes the thoughtfulness and the practicality behind Islamic jurisprudence. The rules aren't meant to be these rigid bureaucratic hurdles. They're really about promoting fairness and harmony, recognizing that human relationships are at the heart of all these interactions.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Now, speaking of clarity and guidelines, are there any situations where the right of preemption doesn't apply? Does it cover every single property transaction between partners, no matter what?
Actually, no, not at all. There are some specific cases where it doesn't apply, and these exceptions are super important for understanding the boundaries of this right. When it works and when it doesn't.
I see. So it's not this universal rule that trumps everything else. There are limits.
Exactly. Imam Malik, based on, established legal principles and precedents, he makes it clear that preemption, it doesn't apply to properties that can't be divided. You know what I mean?
So what do we mean by indivisible in this context? Can you give some examples?
Sure. Think of a well, but without any land around it. It has a function, but you can't practically divide it up among partners. Or a road that cuts through shared property. You need it for access, but splitting it wouldn't make any sense. These are the types of things where preemption simply wouldn't apply.
Okay, so it has to be something that can actually be divided up for preemption to make sense.
Exactly. The whole idea behind preemption is about shared ownership and being able to distribute those shares fairly. If that's impossible, the rule just doesn't work. And in the same vein, preemption doesn't apply to movable assets either.
Okay, so things like livestock or personal items or trading goods, things that are constantly moving around or changing hands.
You got it. The focus is on immovable property, houses, land, things that are a fixed part of that shared ownership.
It seems like these exceptions reinforce the purpose of preemption. To maintain that shared ownership and prevent conflict among partners, it's about applying the rule fairly and not making things unnecessarily complicated.
Absolutely. Islamic jurisprudence is all about practicality and real-world application. The rules aren't supposed to create burdens. They're meant to address actual situations with fairness and nuance.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now imagine this. The original seller, maybe they realize that a partner might use their right of preemption and they try to back out of the deal. Do they have the right to just cancel everything to prevent preemption from happening?
That's a great point. It brings up the importance of commitments and agreements. You can't just back out because you don't like the outcome.
Right.
So Imam Malik addresses this directly. He says that even if the seller tries to cancel the sale just to avoid preemption, the preemptor's right still stands.
So no takebacks just because you change your mind. It's about honoring your word, especially in partnerships.
Exactly. Islamic law upholds the right of preemption, but it also values the sanctity of contracts and fulfilling your obligations. It's about finding that balance, protecting both sides.
Right, so you can't just manipulate the situation to get your way. There's accountability there.
Precisely. It reinforces the importance of trustworthiness in these financial dealings.
It seems like that would really strengthen partnerships, knowing that your rights are protected even if someone tries to pull a fast one.
Definitely. It creates a system of predictability and accountability, which is essential for any kind of healthy partnership. These principles, they're important not just for traditional property, but for any situation where trust and shared responsibility are involved.
That's a good point to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Now, let's say someone tries to bundle a share of the property with other things that weren't originally part of the shared ownership.
Yeah.
Like maybe they include some livestock or tools with the land, and they basically say, take it all or leave it. Can they force the preemptor to buy everything just to get the share they're entitled to?
That's another interesting scenario, and it highlights a potential area for, someone trying to take advantage. But Imam Malik provides guidance on this too. He's pretty thorough.
Okay.
He states that the preemptor, they're only obligated to buy the share of the property itself, not all the extra stuff.
So you can't be forced to buy a bunch of things you don't want just to exercise your preemption, right?
Exactly. It's like you get what you're entitled to, the share, and the rest is a separate matter, subject to negotiation.
Right. You can't just lump everything together and force the preemptor to take it or leave it.
Absolutely. And this prevents the seller from, using preemption as a way to get rid of unwanted items or to inflate the price unfairly.
It seems like there's a consistent theme here, preventing manipulation or coercion when it comes to preemption.
You're right on the money. The system is designed to be fair, transparent, to protect everyone involved. It makes sure preemption is used justly without placing unfair burdens on anyone.
Yeah, it's all about balance and fairness. Now, what happens if some partners decide to waive their preemption right, but others want to exercise it? Does the majority rule, or does everyone have to agree?
Imam Malik, as you might expect, he addresses this scenario as well. And he clarifies that if one partner waives their right, but another insists on using theirs, the one who wants to exercise the right, they have to buy the whole share that's being sold.
Oh, so you can't just claim part of it and leave the rest.
Right. It's all or nothing. It prevents someone from, trying to game the system by waiting and then buying a smaller portion later on. It keeps things clear and prevents potential manipulation.
It's about acting decisively and not trying to outsmart the system.
Exactly. The ruling ensures that preemption is exercised properly and prevents any strategic maneuvering. Now, imagine this. One partner wants to sell their share, but some of the other partners are away. Only one partner is present. This present partner, they have the choice to either use the preemption right or not. What if they try to play it safe, They say, I'll just take my portion now, and we'll see what the others want to do when they get back. If they want to use their right, they can, and if not, I'll take the whole share.
It sounds like they're trying to hedge their bets, keep their options open. But is that allowed under the rules of preemption?
It's a cautious approach, but Imam Malik says that this kind of strategy, it's not allowed in this situation. The partner who's there, they can't just partially claim the share and wait to see what happens. They have to make a decision. Either exercise the full preemption right for the entire share, or step aside and let the sale go through without them.
So no waiting around to see what happens. You have to commit one way or the other.
Precisely. It keeps things moving and prevents uncertainty. It ensures everyone's rights are clear, prevents potential disputes, and makes sure the sale goes smoothly.
It's like the system values clarity, transparency, and making decisions in a timely manner.
Exactly. It prevents delays and discourages anyone from using preemption as a way to stall the process. The rules encourage decisive action. It's fascinating how these rulings address very specific scenarios, but they also reveal these underlying principles, about fairness, being upfront, and taking responsibility. And these principles, they go beyond property transactions. They have a much broader application.
You're absolutely right. Studying these rulings is practical, but it also gives you insight into a whole ethical framework. This framework, with its focus on justice, balance, and considering everyone's needs, it aims to make financial interactions more harmonious and fair. It's like we're looking into a legal system that's deeply connected to social values and ethical principles, trying to create a just and balanced society.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And there's still more to discover about preemption as we continue our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into preemption in Islamic property law, as detailed in Imam Malik's Muwatta.
Yes. It's been fascinating, hasn't it? Exploring all the details, when this right applies, how it works, even when it doesn't. The level of detail and the focus on fairness is really impressive.
It is. Last time we were talking about a situation where one partner wants to sell their share, but others are away. Only one partner is present.
Right.
And we learned that the present partner can't just claim part of the share and wait. They have to either exercise the full right of preemption or pass on it completely.
Exactly. But it makes you wonder, what about those absent partners when they come back? What if they disagree with the present partner's decision?
That's a good point. It wouldn't be fair if they were just left out because they weren't there when the sale happened.
You're right. Islamic law is very mindful of fairness. Imam Malik says that those absent partners, when they return, they have a choice.
Yeah, okay.
They can either accept the present partner's decision, or they can buy the share from them.
So they can exercise their preemption right against the partner who claimed it while they were gone.
Exactly. It's like a second chance to make sure their rights are protected, even if they were away.
It keeps that spirit of shared responsibility alive.
It does. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's think about inheritance situations.
Okay.
Imagine the heirs of a deceased partner. They're worried about dividing up the inherited property.
Right. Splitting it up might lower its value or cause conflict among them. It's a common concern, especially when emotions are high after a loss.
Exactly. People want to honor the inheritance, but also keep the family together. So Imam Malik offers a solution for this.
Oh, that's good.
He says, if the heirs are concerned about breaking up the property, they can all agree to sell it as a whole.
Right here.
And in this case, the right of preemption doesn't apply among the heirs themselves.
So it's like a temporary exception to help things go smoothly. It prioritizes their needs, lets them make the best decision for the family.
Precisely. It recognizes that sometimes being fair means being flexible. Islamic law isn't just about rigid rules. It's about applying those rules in a way that considers people's well-being.
Right. It's about finding solutions that work in real life.
Now, stepping back a bit, let's remember that preemption only applies when it's relevant. It's not a trump card you can use in any transaction between partners.
Right. There are specific conditions that need to be met.
Exactly. Like we talked about before, it only applies to property that can be practically divided and where the boundaries are clear.
So you can't just claim preemption on anything your partner decides to sell.
Yeah.
It has to be something that's part of that shared ownership, something that can be divided.
Exactly. It's not about just getting dibs on everything. And Imam Malik reminds us that it doesn't apply to those indivisible things like a well without land or a road, or to movable assets like, livestock or clothing.
Right. Those clarifications are important. They help us understand when preemption is appropriate and when it's not.
Absolutely. It's about keeping things fair, preventing misuse. Now, here's something else to think about. What if someone buys land where others have a right of preemption, but instead of telling them right away, they wait, hoping maybe they'll forget? What happens if those people come forward later, after a long delay?
It sounds like they're trying to get away with something, relying on people forgetting instead of being open and honest.
That's right. Imam Malik emphasizes the importance of being upfront and transparent in these situations.
Okay.
He says, if you buy land where others have a preemption right, you need to let them know, maybe even involve an authority to make sure the right is either exercised or formally waived. Everyone needs to be aware of their rights.
So no hiding information and hoping for the best.
Right. Transparency is key. If you don't do this, and those people come forward much later, their claim might be weakened, especially if the details of the original sale have become unclear.
So you can't just sit on your rights. You have to actively engage in the process and make your claim in a timely manner.
Exactly. Now, one last scenario for you.
Okay, go for it.
Imagine someone buys land, and sometime later, someone else appears, claiming they have an inheritance right to part of that land.
A surprise heir. That definitely complicates things. How does Islamic law deal with that?
It's complex, but Imam Malik, as always, provides a solution grounded in justice. He says if the inheritance right is valid, the heir has a legitimate claim to a share of the land.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You can't just ignore someone's inheritance rights.
Right. But there's an interesting twist here.
Oh, tell me more.
Imam Malik says that the heir also inherits the right of preemption, even though they weren't part of the original ownership. If they can prove their claim, they can step in and buy out the share that was sold.
So they not only inherit the land, they inherit the right to protect their share of it.
Exactly. It's like the inheritance includes not just the property itself, but the legal mechanisms that go with it.
Wow, that's really insightful.
It demonstrates the depth of Islamic law, making sure rights are upheld across generations.
It's been an incredible journey, exploring all these intricacies of preemption in Islamic law.
It has. We've seen how preemption isn't just about rules, it's about principles. Transparency, protecting existing partners, promoting shared responsibility.
These principles can be applied even today in modern contexts where shared ownership goes beyond just land and houses.
Absolutely. It gives us a lot to think about as we navigate our own financial dealings and partnerships.
How can we apply these principles of fairness and transparency in our own lives? That's something for all of us to ponder.
Indeed it is. Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration. May your pursuit of knowledge continue to light your way.
And may your echoes of Ihsan resonate in all that you do.